thank you all for having me tonight. I appreciate the invitation, and I hope that you find this little presentation interesting and informative, and I hope that it answers some questions that I've gotten from a lot of you over the years, as I've shown here and as I've seen some of you at other shows. So I'm going to start out here. I put the shock photo on the first slide here, just because I know that Tucson crowd is probably looking at that going, "What are you, crazy?" Yeah. So yeah, I love painting outside in the winter, and I just thought that would be a fun introduction. Maybe wake you up from that good meal that we had. A lot of people ask me, and the subject of my talk tonight is going to be, how the heck did you end up painting in this weird sort of geometric style? Where did that come from? And the honest answer is, I'm not really sure. Thank you and good night. But we're going to hopefully trace the journey of that development here tonight. That's my hope, is that you'll be able to see where I started and where I am now, and be able to see that progression as we go along through time. So the next slide here, people have often asked me, where did it all start? Well, this is where it all started, out in the desert in Utah. My interest in the landscape came from my first backpacking trip into the deserts of Utah when I was still in college, and I had never seen anything like it. It was utterly captivating, and it became that kind of fire in the belly, that little ember of inspiration that's kind of kept burning through all of these years. It's kept me coming back. I still go out in the desert every week. I still go hiking. I don't backpack as much as I used to, but you know, that's part of getting older and being busy. So keep this slide in mind, because we're going to come back to this spot a little later in the presentation. When I was in college, I had a pretty rough go from the fine arts perspective. And so most of my work was emphasizing graphic design. And on my side time, for my drawing credits, I was doing landscapes of the places that I had visited out in Utah in pastels. These are a couple of the better examples of some of the work from that period of time. This group of works ended up being what I used to approach my very first art gallery. And while that ultimately came to nothing, it was an important first step for me in terms of my stylistic development. I don't know if you can see it, but especially here in this area and in some of these harder edges here and some of the underside of this big arch here, you can start to see a few clues about where I'm going to end up. And that, again, I think was just a product of my, at that time, extensive work in graphic design. Like I say, this was mostly stuff I was doing on the side or in my drawing classes. Now, this is one of my very first excursions, plein air painting. After a few years of trying unsuccessfully to make a living as a pastelist, I met a gallery owner in Denver who said, if you really want to be a serious professional, you should take up oils, which at that time was not a suggestion I was interested in hearing, because my oil painting instruction in college had just been abysmal. It was a miserable experience. So the quote, "Every day you spend behind a brush is a school day," is something that a friend that I didn't get to know very well, he died before I got to know him too well, said to me once on a painting day. And it kind of stuck with me, because it's very, very true. If there's any core truth to the pursuit of an artistic life or a creative life, it's that you're never going to stop learning. And that is another key element to how my style continued to grow and develop over the years. So this is my second ever plein air painting. And I'm going to say up front too, we were having some issues with the color on this projection system, so I do apologize. Some of the colors are a little washed out. That may affect some of the slides later in the presentation where I'm talking about nuances and things. The best we could do. Chuck and I have been working on trying to get this thing right for a little while, and he's put in his level best. So bear that in mind as you look at some of the slides. At this point in time, this I had only been oil painting for about a week, and I did this at a workshop. This is Rocky Mountain National Park. Maybe some of you recognize it. But it's a good indicator of where I started as a painter, which I think you'll agree is very traditionally oriented. There's not a lot of the geometric, hard edge sort of design elements in this painting. And this would be my path for a few years going forward. This is another early work done later that same year.
If you go back to that one, are there people in the, are those people walking in the?
No, just trees. I mean, it's only my second painting. Cut me a break. People? I can't do that right now. I can barely paint a tree, as we see. So anyway, my work continued along this line for the first few years of my career as a painter. Now, at this point, I wouldn't have called myself a professional. I was painting outside pretty much every day. And I was just focused on trying to develop an eye, trying to develop a sense of color, how light works outside, how color works outside, and how that color choice and value choice creates the illusion of a bright sunny day. Here's another example from early on. This is one where I think the reds in that background area got a little washed out. But again, sort of what you would think of as maybe a traditional impressionist approach to painting. These paintings were all completed on location, done in about 2 hours. And this was just me trying to find my way, me trying to learn how to speak in the language of paint. One of the other elements that I practiced early on the advice of a professional that I was taking classes from, was do color charts. Yes, it's boring. Yes, it's, a tedious job, but if you don't know how the color on your palette is going to work when you start mixing it, you're going to struggle in the field where time is of the essence. So in a field painting, typically you have about 2 hours. That's kind of the rule of thumb. The light will be so different after 2 hours that if you keep painting, you're going to be chasing the light, which is you're starting to paint the way things look 2 hours after you started. Interesting little factoid about most landscapes, at least in my experience, those paintings are how the landscape looked when the artist started. So I did a lot of these charts. Whenever I added a color to my palette, I would do a chart. So this chart here, I was thinking about adding that color, and I wanted to know how's it going to work with everything else that's currently on my palette. So all these colors are what I currently used. And I just wanted to see, will this color add anything? Currently, and for the last 6 years, I've been using a palette of 11 colors in white. That's it. I spent some time in my first few years outside working with only 4 colors in white, again on the advice of a mentor, and that taught me a lot, probably more than anything else that I could have done about how color works and how to make it. And I was told, hey, when you hit a color outside that you can't make with these 4 colors, maybe think about adding one, but do it carefully. And so this is what I would do to test out and see if a new color on the palette would add anything to the range. Now, at this point in time, I had only my college education for art history. There were a lot of American art movements that I had never heard of because my college professors didn't care about that. They liked abstract expressionism, everything that Europeans were doing. I remember one professor came in quite excitedly with a copy of Art News about an artist in New York that had filled a room with dirt. It was a plexiglass. You were just going to walk around a room filled with dirt and random objects. This is what they thought was, qualified as great art. This was genius level. Nobody's ever thought of this before. Yeah, there's a reason for that. So as I started learning from and talking to other artists, other professionals, and getting advice, I was turned on to a whole host of different artists across the country that were working at times in parallel with the French Impressionists, or that they had been students of the French Impressionists and brought those ideas back. And so this is one of those artists. His name is William Wendt. He was a California Impressionist. He lived in Laguna Beach. And I think you can get an idea from looking at this, maybe where some of my interest in those angular forms, even some of the trees and things, if you look down here in the foreground, these are blocky. They're very geometric looking. The first time I saw his work, I was utterly fascinated. And I didn't have any opportunity for several years to see an actual William Wendt painting in person. But this structure, the geometry and the structure that he was employing, even down to the shapes of the objects in his landscape, I found it fascinating. Another early influence, Edgar Payne. And I'm sure most of you have probably heard of his paintings. Again, not only just in terms of the geometry and the compositional elements that he insisted on in his work, but also there's a lot of impressionist color in some of these areas here. It's broken color. You're getting an optical impression from having 2 or 3 different things juxtaposed next to each other. So it's kind of a sum is more than the parts approach to painting. And this was another thing that I found very interesting, because the way that he thought about his compositions and his colors, it spoke to me very immediately. It was very accessible to me. And as a young artist, as you start to learn, you get exposed to things that you go look at and you think, well, I guess I'm supposed to like this, but it doesn't connect with me. I don't feel this. This guy and William Wendt, like, I couldn't get enough. I bought every book I could find about their work, and I studied them. So this brings me to my first, this was the anchor piece for the first one-man show I ever had. This was in Denver, Colorado in 1999. And this takes us back to Moraine Park. This is the same place that I had been in that very first painting that I showed you. A little bit different viewpoint. But here again, it's still fairly impressionistic, but you can start to see in some of these mid-ground areas especially, where I've been taking to heart the lessons that William Wendt and Edgar Payne had to offer. It was changing the way I was thinking about color in shadows. It was changing the way I thought about shapes and how to articulate them in the landscape. And so going forward here, you can now start to see, this is a few years later, this is a field study again, but I hope you can start to see some of the nuances in these shadowy areas where there's not just one color. There is a variety of kind of broken, if you will, colors that add up to this rock. These are what these rocks looked like, and I had to figure out, how do I paint that using color? It's mostly one value, but there's a lot of different colors in there. So at this point, we're at about 2003 now, and I'm starting to much more actively experiment with those impressionistic color approaches, where you're juxtaposing multiple different colors that might be just variations on a theme in a highlight area or a shadow area to build depth and life and interest. Sometimes the things that you see in a painting that you think make the light in the painting, they're not things that are always readily apparent. I mean, it's easy enough to see, okay, there's a light hitting the edge of that rock, but there's light bouncing off all this stuff too, and it's bouncing up into those shadows. And I have to give some indication of that, because that makes a lively painting. So the Impressionist approach to the colors was my way of trying to liven up my paintings, make them more interesting, and give them kind of a repeat viewability, something you could go back and look at again and again, and maybe see something new each time. This moves us ahead to about 2007, and I'm sorry about the color in this image. It's pretty far off from where it started. But here again, you can start to see some of that impressionistic approach, but there's also, again, more hints of that geometric outlook. And At this point in time, I'm still taking the occasional workshop. I'm still getting the occasional critique from a more established professional. And this is a point at which I was kind of being encouraged to do one thing and feeling pulled to do something else within. And that became kind of a defining struggle for a few years for me going forward. So this is another painting from about that same area where I was starting to cross the line. Here you've got that sort of hard-edged geometry. Up here in the corner, you've got some of that same thing. But then there's still these very painterly touches, very loose, sort of brushy work down in these snowy patches. I could feel myself struggling. I could feel myself listening to the voices of advisors and colleagues saying, you need to soften that edge. You need to, emphasize that design, the design a little less. Your compositions they're a little out there. They're a little too dynamic. Maybe you need to, tone it down a little bit. At that point in time, I was starting to continuing to discover other influences, other artists that I was seeing and going, this is amazing. So this, you may know, is Robert Daughters, New Mexico artist. Phenomenal painter. His work, I never get tired of looking at it. And in many ways, it's that same sense that I'm working towards applying in my own work. I would love for people who collect my artwork to say, I never get tired of looking at this. It's lively and interesting every time. So I'm a huge fan of Robert's paintings. And I studied these things. I would sit down in the evening, make notes about them, think about them, try to analyze what it was that he was doing that I found so compelling. And at this point also, I discovered Maynard Dixon. Now, I'm not sure, I'm sure it's not prosecutable, but I think it's absolutely criminal that my art history education in college never mentioned Maynard Dixon. And his voice, more than any other voice, is distinctive among even Western artists, much less artists around the world. So another artist that was not afraid to hit the geometry, the design, and have this kind of almost abstract sensibility in his representational landscapes. He was the first artist that I'd ever seen who really blended the geometry, the design sensibility, the color sensibility, and just a unique voice. What struck me about his work was just how individual it was. And then, of course, a little later on, I discovered Ed Mell. And here's another example of somebody that was just blazing a trail. Sometimes when you are struggling to find your voice, you're struggling to figure out who the heck am I as an artist and what am I about? Seeing people who are just unabashedly doing their thing can be very, very reassuring because you see this and you go, well, he's doing it and that looks pretty amazing. Like, I want to learn how to do that. I want to make that kind of impression. So again, all of these guys that I was studying, I was hunting down books about them. I was coming to shows if I could, or going to museums, whatever I could do to get to see their work up close and in person. And at this point in my work, things hadn't quite tipped over the edge yet, but I was getting there. So around about 2010, another pivotal moment in my life occurred when I was introduced to Mark Sublette by a fellow painter who used to show here at the club, Stephanie Birdsall. I don't know if many of you remember her. She's living back east now, doing well. But she announced to me one day, I've made an appointment for you at the gallery to go talk to Mark. I really think you guys need to meet. Be there at 10:30. So off I went to Medicine Man Gallery and met Mark, and we went through my website. And he went image by image. And at that time, there were about 200 paintings on the site. And he just picked out the ones. He says, this, this, more of this, more of this. So this is about a year later. And this was kind of a pivotal painting for me because it was really the first time that I had given myself permission to just let that geometry fly, like just show it off. Make the painting about the geometry of this waterfall. And the quote here is something that I have on my wall of wisdom in my studio because it reminds me that advice is good up to a point as an artistic person or as a creative person. It's great to take advice and counsel from experienced people who have come before you, learn what they have to offer, take what works for you, leave the rest behind, but you're not looking to imitate. You have to get outside of that impulse to imitate and start to innovate. Find your own way. And so this painting I remember quite fondly because it was the first time I had that sensation of just like, I'm free. I can actually do this, and it's going to be great. It's going to be fun. It's going to look amazing. And there's another story I was telling Chuck earlier about a gallery that I approached right around this time before I had embraced this way of doing things. And that gallerist was very kind and very constructive to me. But he told me at the end of our conversation, he says, I like your work, but I don't see enough of you in it. I see too much of your teachers, and I already have them. Go figure out who you want to be as a painter. So I took that advice to heart, and the quote reminds me of that. I have this hanging on my wall in my studio. I look at it every day. So this is when the geometric, design-focused approach really started to take off. At this point, we are now 2013, 2014-ish, and I feel like I've kind of found my way at last. I'm still focused on good color, lively color, interesting compositions, but I'm also looking at the structure of the landscape. How does it work as a geometrical construct? How do these mountains work? How do these arroyos work? And these two are kind of pivotal pieces just because they're among the first pieces that I ever did when I came to Tucson. The first time I visited Tucson to paint was in 2007. And so these are about 5 years after that, after I had sort of crossed the Rubicon, if you will, of just be yourself. Figure out who you are as an artist and do what you want to do. I think it's unfortunate in some ways that there can be pressure on younger artists to conform to principles or techniques that older artists think are the way to do things. That's the way you paint. That's the best way to paint, of course. I'm doing it. And unfortunately, if you're not a little bit of a cantankerous, headstrong sort like myself, you can get subsumed by that. You can become too concerned with what does my teacher say? What does my mentor say? And I don't think you always exploit the opportunities that you get to actually say, well, what do I want to say about this? Now, my journey may not represent the journeys of other artists. Everybody's different. We all follow a different path. But I always felt like there was a little bit of a conflict between the way I was supposed to paint and the way I wanted to paint. This is the way I wanted to paint. So here we're moving forward again to 2016. This is a 40 by 50 canvas. One of my first, this was the canvas from my first show at Sublette, at Mark Sublette Gallery. And yeah, I really feel like at this point I had embraced the way I wanted to paint. I had kind of found my voice, and Mark was kind enough to provide a venue in which I could present that to the world and see what people thought of it. And that show was very successful. So in a way, I feel like it sort of relaunched my career. was really the most successful show I had had to date, and it was the new stuff. It was me. It was, here I am. This is how I see the landscape and how I see the world. These are a couple of other paintings from that same show. Again, similar kind of emphasis on impressionistic colors. In the shadows especially, you can really see it, but also this very geometrical, shape-oriented approach to the landscape. Now, I was telling you about that scene, the first slide. This is kind of a comparison point for what I see with my camera versus what I see with my eyes. And I do apologize for the color issues that we've been having, but I hope you can kind of get a sense of where the artist's eye will show you things that a camera can't. And that's the value of plein air painting, really. It's not so much being able to get your legit cred by going out and braving the bugs and the wind and the rain and the snow and everything else. It's about the information that you get and the decision-making process that you go through. And in this piece in particular, you can really see how the photograph, which averages things out, it really darkened this whole area, which is just suffused with reflected light. There's so much going on up in here. And so this is kind of a happy medium of that newfound style, that newfound confidence in the geometric approach, and my way of seeing things with a plein air painting adventure. And here's another one where the colors are a little bit goofy, especially in the shadows. These areas are much richer and deeper blue. But this painting is a recent example. In fact, if you want to see this, it's still hanging over at Mark Sublette Medicine Man Gallery. So you could go see it in person if you want to get a look at it. But this is just geometry through and through. The structure of the landscape, the way that the geology works on these. This is a formation called the Book Cliffs. It's about 10 minutes from where I live in Grand Junction. And I wanted to show you, that's the finished product. That's where it started. So this is the bones of that geometric, design-focused approach. As I've painted the landscape more and more and more, I've just been fascinated, especially in the West, with the architecture of these landscapes, how they're built, how they erode into these shapes and forms. They're very structural, and it's fascinating to me. I just can't get enough of it. I ripped my hair out painting this painting, but, I got there in the end. But yeah, so I just wanted to kind of give you a comparison point for that particular piece. And then I wanted to take you a little further. Now, this is where we might get into trouble with the color. So this is one of the detail shadow areas at the very top of that pinnacle. And I was kind of hoping you could perceive, again, there's a very impressionistic use of color in here. There's a lot of different shades, a lot of different temperatures. It adds up to something that you see as one thing. But when you go look at it up close or after a period of time, these things are going to start to pop out to you. The variations in color temperature or in the tone between here and here, for example. That's a huge temperature shift. So this is the meat and the guts of my process now. It's just mixing. And I heard a quote from a musician. I don't know if you all are familiar with Bruce Hornsby. He was pretty famous a few years back. But he said, nobody ever accused me of playing one note when five would do. And that's right there is me playing five notes when maybe one would do. But I can't stop myself. Because as much as I'm fascinated by structure, I'm also fascinated by color theory. And it's something that I continue to study, and not just in terms of here's how colors work on a color wheel or this or that, but the way that our eyes perceive color, the way that our minds perceive color. A lot of what people see in paintings has nothing to do with what's actually in the painting. It's the way their eyes and their brain are processing the information. So I love showing people paintings like this because some people immediately just go, my God, there's like a million colors in there. And others will never be able to make them out. And it's, no fault of their own. It's just the way we're all built. I think, I don't know, maybe I have some extra rods and cones or something, but I see this stuff and it lights me up. So here's my palette. This is a 2-foot by 4-foot palette. This was the day I was doing touch-ups and tweaks on that painting. So these are mostly all of the colors that I had mixed for that piece. And I was literally just spending about a day and a half, 2 days, tweaking here, tweaking there, one brushstroke here, one brushstroke there. Now that canvas is a 30 inch by 60 inch canvas. So 3 feet by 5 feet roughly. So to say my process is sort of painstaking is probably accurate. And then in my studio, I also have racks under that palette. Now these are different colors for a different painting, but oftentimes those racks are entirely full of colors that I've mixed, either as master colors, which I'm going to vary, or as small little bits of a very precise color that I don't want to run out of. So yeah, even with all this, I'm still running out of room for mixed colors in my studio. If I work on more than 3 paintings at a time, I'm in bad shape for color storage. But this kind of, I think, I hope shows you where my ideas about color come from and how important I feel it is to kind of have a little fun just in the colors. There's a little bit of jazz in those colors. There's some improvisation. There are some maybe notes here and there that might seem a little bit dissonant, but when you put them all together in a whole, they work. And a lot of times it's just you paint it and you look. Does it work? Sure. Great. Move on. Here's another painting that kind of also is an impressionistic approach that I wanted to highlight some other things with. There is a lot going on, more than in most of my paintings. This is a 12-inch by 30-inch canvas. And there's an area in here, right down around here, that I'm going to highlight in the next couple of slides that, again, it really brings together all of the elements that I consider to be sort of the pinnacles, the backbone of my approach to painting now, which is structure, i.e. design, and that sort of impressionistic, jazzy approach to color that is it's used within that structural approach to painting. So here's a detail of that area. And I do apologize for, this is about a 2-inch by 3-inch area. I do apologize for some of the reds and things being washed out there, but this, I hope, illustrates for you the importance to me of thinking about the structure of the painting, not just as a whole, but in terms of individual sections. I want every area of every painting to be interesting. I really don't like leaving space unfilled. And in this particular piece here, you can see there's, I'll move forward to the next slide, we'll come back. This is a black and white of that same area. There's not a lot of variation in light and dark, in values, but there's a lot of variation in the colors, which is what creates that hint of some sunlight starting to creep in on the right side. So this is me, at this point, having fully kind of gone with that geometric impressionist approach, which I didn't come up with that. A collector of mine many years ago who really was just disappointed that I hadn't come up with a name for my style, she was determined to help me. And so she came back, I saw her at a show, and she says, by the time I see you next, I'm going to have this figured out. I said, okay, whatever. And the next time I came to the gallery, she came bursting in and said, I got it. "You are a geometric impressionist." And I said, "Okay, if you say so." It's, impressionism, I think, can be a word that gets tossed around a little too easily sometimes, but it's not necessarily untrue. I would say that my impressionist bent is more aligned with my color and my approach to color, and my composition and structural painting approach is more aligned with my design background and my fondness for harder edge design. Um, One of the things I did briefly while I was still getting my painting career launched was some freelance work. I did a bunch of logos. I wasn't very happy with any of them, but the clients were, so I didn't keep any images of them, which I'm kicking myself for now. Uh, but I just really love geometry, how things fit together, how structures fit together, whether it's three-dimensional or two-dimensional. I've had people ask me, like, have you ever tried sculpting? Yeah, it didn't work out. I don't seem to be able to think three-dimensionally in that material sense, but in a two-dimensional sense, definitely. So we've got our black and white there. This is one last piece. Now this is another one that's still over at Mark Sublette Medicine Man Gallery. So you can go take a look at it. I would encourage you to do so because this slide is kind of wonky. I'm gonna show you two areas, one right up in here and one right up in here. Just again, to sort of give you a sense of where my impressionistic approach to color really goes. So I'm using lots of variations on themes, and I'm also using some basic complementary color theory. In this side here, you've got some blues and purples up here, you've got some oranges and reds down here. That's how I'm getting light bouncing into those shadows. In this particular scene, there is a lot, these are white rocks basically, so there's lots of light that's bouncing around. The piece is called Light Play. And so going into these areas and being cognizant of how light changes temperature on a white piece of rock or on a white patch of snow for that matter is really critical to getting that sense of light in the painting. And then the piece here on the left, this is the shadowy area up on the backdrop here behind the scenes, right? So it's up in here along this ridge. Now, when you look at the painting, that does its job. It's just a dark, contrasting shape for the main points of interest. But there has to be something there. There has to be something for, whoops, wrong way, for people to look at. There has to be some interest built into it. So it's not just one thing. It's a whole bunch of different colors arranged in ways that I hope are not just harmonious from a color perspective, but from an angular structural perspective as well. Because to me, there's interest just in that. It's almost, you can almost look at these as like abstract paintings. I've had somebody say that to me too. They're like, you stand back and look at it and it looks like a representational landscape, kind of realistic, I guess. And you get up to it and it's full of abstract stuff. Like you could cut this thing up and you'd have a whole bunch of little abstract paintings. Yeah, I guess so. And I like that. So I'm continuing to kind of push that. This is kind of that every day is a school day behind a brush. Sometimes you hear people say things like that and you think, I wonder what I could do. Like, how far can I go with that? And it's interesting to get feedback from people about what they find charming and interesting and intriguing about the paintings. So that concludes the technical discussion. I hope that you guys have felt like you've gotten a bit of an insight into how I developed this unique style that I seem to have. I wanted to mention this. I published this book a couple of years ago. There's a copy up here if anybody is interested. I'm giving a little bit of a deal for anybody that was here tonight or in the Friends of Western Art group. If you go to my website, you can order the book, and if you type in the little discount code here, you'll get free shipping. So this book is the coda at the end of a show that I ran in Grand Teton National Park for 6 years. And it's a separate project, but it's also a little bit of a different look at some different kinds of landscapes. Mostly these are mountain and river type landscapes. And then the last thing I want to mention, thank you all for your patience, is I have a show coming up at Mark Sublette Medicine Man Gallery on March 28th. Will be the opening day. I will be here for that. It's Infinite Sky, so it's a show of sky paintings. And I would encourage everybody, if you're interested in my work and you want to come see some brand new, fresh stuff, come on down to the gallery and we can chat about it. So, anyway, that kind of closes out my presentation. I have no idea how long I've been talking, but I wanted to include some time at the end for question and answer. So thank you all for listening, and if you have a question, just type up.
What's the size of light play?
Light play is 24 by 24.
Yes.
Yes,
Do you use any filter? Do you have any rounded brush strokes, or are they all like flat?
they're all brights.
They're all bright.
Yeah,
Don't have
yeah.
any filters or any.
Nope,
Just all bright.
all brights. Yep, and I have, yeah, so for anybody who doesn't know, flat brushes, the square ones, come in two types, flats and brights. And brights are just flats that have shortened bristles, so they're very, might be half as long in the bristles. Bright brushes are very stiff and resilient. They hold a lot of paint, and they make very clear, distinct, square brush strokes. And I just happen to like how they push paint around, so that's why I mostly use those. A lot of people have asked me, like, do you have a plan? Like, how much do you plan out your paintings? How much of what's on there do you know is going to be there? And really, the honest answer is that skeleton, that first initial drawing, is the only set of facts. Everything else is improvisation. So I'm working from a loose plan, but there's a dialogue that happens with the canvas. And it took me a number of years to realize that that was what was happening. When you're young and you're inexperienced, you don't realize that I'm fighting with this thing because it's trying to tell me, no, this is the wrong way. And I had an experience probably about 15 years ago now where I had a canvas that I had blocked in a painting on, and I just lost interest in that subject. It was a waterfall. The composition wasn't working. It was just vertical and weird, and I didn't like it. So I decided, well, this is a perfectly good canvas, and I just put a quick wash of titanium white over what was underneath to obscure it back to where I could start a fresh painting on it. So I start this new painting, which is completely unrelated. It's a grove of aspen trees in the wintertime in the snow. And the study I was working from was just very tonalist, very like subdued colors, very close values, like a foggy day in the forest in the winter. I'm blocking this thing in, and where the waterfall had been in the old painting was this light ray coming through the trees. That's it. It just was like, where'd that come from? And then I had a moment of like, should I listen to this? Like, the painting is telling me, go this way, deviate from your plan, deviate from your sketch, because the idea that you're seeing in here that just came spontaneously is going to be great. You're going to love it. And after that, I started to understand more that a painting, you start out with an intention, you start out with an idea in your head, but it evolves and it talks to you. And some paintings talk to you more than others. Some paintings demand that you adapt to what they're suggesting. It can be something as random as one brushstroke. You're laying things out, you're getting shapes and things laid and ready to fill in, and then you go, well, there's an interesting whole group of shapes there that I didn't see until I put that brushstroke down. And then the question is, do I follow it? Now, having learned that lesson a few times, now I follow where the painting asks me to go. If that means I deviate from the plan, so be it, because the paintings are ultimately about the idea. They're not about the facts on the ground. If I was interested merely in showing you how that meadow looked down to the last blade of grass, I would take a photograph. And that's not to diminish a skilled photographer, but that's not what I'm after. What I'm after is, how does it feel to be standing there? Seeing this, feeling the breeze on your face, watching the grass move in the wind and how it changes. Can I get some of that essence? And so if a painting is pulling me in that direction, I will abandon the plan and I will follow where it takes me. Because more than often than not, it's going to take me to a good place.